I just built my own controller, and let me show you how I did it. The first thing I did was scour the internet for plans until I found one that I really liked, which brought me to the Slimbox by Jay Feder on printables. By the way, links to everything useful will be in the description down below. Now, here's the thing. The model for the keycaps here are for Kyle low-profile switches, which are much more expensive and harder to find compared to Gateron switches, at least from where I'm from. So I ended up modifying the model so that it would fit onto the Gateron switches. Link will also be in the description for that. I then got these models printed at a local shop. As for the brains of the controller, I just bought an Arduino Pro Micro, which is relatively inexpensive. And for the switches, I wanted something clicky, so I ended up getting blue Gateron low-profile switches. So since I got the case and the keycaps printed in separate shops, the case ended up arriving way before the keycaps, and so I just went on ahead and put the switches into the case. And also, because I was so excited and I wanted to see what it would look like, I put on the keycaps onto the switches, which ended up being a good idea because it ended up being much harder to put the keycaps onto the switches. So it got to the point where it was just so much easier to remove the switch and then push the keycaps onto it, which means it would have been almost impossible to put the keycaps onto it once it was all wired in. So for the code, I had to install Arduino IDE and download the code that I'll be using for the controller. Once I had everything, all I did was upload the code to the board, and we're good. But don't make my mistake though, where I ended up choosing the wrong board type, because IDE said Arduino Micro instead of Pro Micro, and so I thought it was different, even though it kind of is, but it really isn't. So what will end up happening if you do that, is that you get a device not recognized error, but it's a very simple fix. So what I did was I just wired a simple button with a spare switch to the ground and reset pins to the board, which will let me very easily reset the board by just pressing onto the button. You have to be quick with this step though, as after resetting twice, you only have a couple seconds to upload the correct code to the correct board. Alternatively, you can just use a wire and just short out the ground and reset with that same wire, but that was much more difficult since you have to be quick with this step. But once you've uploaded the correct code, you're all set. I think it worked! I just followed the photo from Jay Feder's printable and the pin guide in the Eno file and just soldered everything together. Black wire for ground and red wire for data, I think. Once all the switches were soldered, I plugged it in and brought up a gamepad tester to test if everything was working. As you can see, I have a button here that wasn't sending any signal, so I just ended up replacing the switch for that, and voila, it worked. Once everything is working, you can call it a day. However, the signal coming from this controller will be a direct input signal, and if you want to use this controller on a game like Guilty Gear Strive or UMVC3, I ended up having to install an app called X Output, which basically lets you turn a direct input signal to an X input signal. And once I did that, that's everything. I now have a working Slimbox. Relatively inexpensive and quite easy to build, so maybe you should give it a shot. So here's a couple clips of me testing it out.
Duel 1. Let's rock. Slap. Duel 2. Let's rock. Perfect. Round can't escape.
Round 2. Fight. Finish him. Mercy. Brutality.
What?
Scorpion wins. Flawless victory.